In the fall, something that I love to do is go deer hunting. I absolutely love deer season. I love being out in nature, being out in the cool air, and I just love to see a nice great big old buck come into my tree stand. But something that I hate is that I hate to see a wounded or a crippled animal. You know, maybe I got a bad shot on a deer, or somebody else got a bad shot on a deer, and as a result of that, that deer is oftentimes left hobbling through the woods, agonizing pain, hurting, and suffering. But let me ask you a serious question. Is that relatable? I mean, have you ever been hurt or wounded by a friend? Or maybe you're just going through a time in your life where you're suffering, where you're hurting. In Psalm 55, David was going through an excruciatingly painful time in his life. Absalom, a person that he loved, cared about, was stabbing him in the back. And something that I believe would probably be even more painful than a bullet or an arrow going right through my heart is that of an arrow of a friend, a person that you trusted, but you feel as if you've been betrayed. David said, "Give ear to my prayer, O God, and do not hide yourself from my supplication. Attend to me and hear me." And listen how David describes these feelings that he was enduring. David was saying, "I am restless in my complaint and moan noisily." It's as if he is in such agonizing pain that he's crying out loud, that emotional pain is so deep that he moans in anguish. And David continued on by saying, "Because of the voice of my enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they bring down trouble upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is severely pained within me." It's as if David was saying, my heart is broken. My heart is broken within me because of what's going on. And David went on to say in verse 4, "My heart is severely pained within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me." As David said these words, you can almost feel the anguish in his heart. You can almost feel the brokenness in his heart. These are the words of a wounded man. A man who was wounded by a person whom he thought was his friend. David went on to say in verses 12 to 14, he went on to say, For it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it, nor is it one who hates me, who has exalted himself against me, then I could hide from him. But it was you, a man of my equal, my companion, and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked to the house of God and the throne. In other words, he was saying, it wasn't an enemy that I was at war against who did these things to me. Maybe I could understand it then, or maybe he's even going as far as saying, if it was somebody that I knew that hated me, then I could understand it. But in verse 13 he said, it was you, a person whom he considered to be his friend, a person that he loved, cared for, had probably reached out to in the past, a person whom David, who he even said was a man of my equal. In verse 14 it says, we took sweet counsel together and walked to the house of God and the throne. In other words, we could put it in a modern day saying by, this was the same guy that I went to church with. We used to go to church together. And that's who hurt David. It wasn't an enemy whom he was at war against. It wasn't a person that he knew already hated him. But it was a person that David cared about, that David loved. A person whom David considered to be his friend. And that's why these wounds went so deep. That's why David was experiencing this brokenheartedness. And the pain was so great that David, in so many words, more or less said, oh, I just wish I could run away. I just wish that I could get away. David said, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Indeed, I would wander far off and remain in the wilderness. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest. It is as if David was saying, man, I just wish I could run away from these problems. I wish I could just run away from the pain. I wish I could run away from the broken heart. So what did David do about his brokenheartedness? What did David do about his pain? David prayed. In verses 16 and 17, David said, as for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon, I will pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. In this psalm and so many other psalms of David, David literally poured his heart out to God. And whenever he poured his heart out to God, to me it's like David, he never sugarcoated his feelings whatsoever. Though what David was feeling, he poured it out to God. Now, I don't ever believe that David was ever disrespectful to God in his prayers. But I believe that David was very honest in his prayers. And he told God exactly how he felt. That he described his pain in such vivid words and feelings. And he shared his heart with God to the best of his ability as he prayed and as he cried out to God. But in Psalm 55, not only does David describe his feelings of what it felt like being betrayed by a friend or hurt by a friend, he also went as far as what did he do about it? He prayed. He cried out to God. But there is a very strong application that David gives to us in verse 22. David said for us, David said, cast your burden on the Lord. Cast your burden on the Lord. And that really is the application of this psalm. And with that, there are two things that I'd like to point out. Number one, whenever we call out to God or whenever we cry out to God, we're crying out to God for help. God, help me in this problem. Help me to bring resolve to a situation. Help me to forgive, or help someone to forgive me if I've done them wrong. In Psalm 121, the psalmist said, I will look unto the hills from whence cometh my help. My help comes from the Lord. And so whenever we call out to God or cry out to God, we're crying out to God for help. God, please help me. But secondly, whenever we cry out to God or call out to God, we're calling out not just for help, but for hope. For hope. You see, God is the creator and sustainer of the world. And through His infinite wisdom, God can help us. God can bring resolve to situations. Paul even told us in Romans 8:28 that God can cause all things to work out for the good of those who love Him and those who are called according to His purpose. That God has unique ways of working out our troubles and situations. And God even has a way of sometimes just bringing peace in the midst of the storm, or even peace to a heart that's been broken. And after we've casted our cares upon the Lord, or as David said in verse 22, casting our burdens on the Lord, David closed this psalm, and in his final words of verse 23, David said, I will trust in you.